you hear there's a lot of discussion about what treaties are in the media today, and a lot of people don't understand what treaties are. Treaties are simply an agreement between two sovereign parties, right, or two independent parties. Now, we could have some kind of agreement, you and I. We might not call it a treaty, but it's a small scale kind of understanding, right? A mutual understanding. Your obligations, my obligations, and treaties that we talk about in Mi'kma'ki were basically peace and friendship treaties. There was never land surrendered here in this part of the eastern part of Canada. They were peace and friendship treaties. There were a number of them, starting just after what they call data sovereignty, which is, I believe, 1713 with the Treaty of Utrecht, where Acadia shifts hands from the French to the British now. And that date, 1713, is an important date in Nova Scotia because now legalists call it the date of sovereignty. That's the assumption that when the British gained access to Acadia then, that they exercised a sovereign rule over what was then Mi'kma'ki, right? Mi'kmaq territory. And that's where that kind of term terra nullius comes in. If the land's not what's the word I'm looking for? If it's not farmed or etc., then it's deemed empty.
Oh, so basically the fact that if Mi'kmaq people weren't raising crops,
yeah.
Continuous location, then it's kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, it's
That's
basically,
what they were saying?
it's empty and it's up for grabs. So they established sovereignty in Mi'kma'ki at that date. A lot of people don't understand that. Mi'kmaq were on, like we talked about this previously, Mi'kmaq were on all these 42 river systems. They were independent, they were autonomous, they had social structure, economic practices, they had all these things, trade, and to me, that suggests that land was being used strategically, right? For example, we talked about stone fishwares, and we talked about how Mi'kmaq were using the mouth of rivers, heads of tide, the intermittent portions of rivers, the outflow of interior lakes. Well, that's an established land use pattern, right? But that was just kind of British common law. But anyway, we get back to these treaties, and there were a number of treaties signed here in the province. We hear 1752, peace and friendship, 1760-61, kind of tied to Marshall. Jim Simon out of Shubenacadie and Junior Donald Marshall out of Sydney. But we have 1725 treaties in the 1720s, we have 1740s, 1750s, 1760-61, but the most important ones, 1752 and 60-61. Again, those were peace and friendship treaties. Mi'kmaq would keep the peace, be a good behavior, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And
what were the British supposed to do if the Mi'kmaq keep the peace and be good neighbors?
Yeah, with the French intent to settle and colonize. What they are, they're a legal binding agreement now. It's interesting because you see, our take on history is, well, because history moves ahead, it negates anyone's responsibility tied to these treaties, right? We've advanced enough that these treaties are meaningless. So throughout the 1800s, when Mi'kmaq people were being charged for hunting and fishing and taking salmon, hunting caribou, moose. They were being charged and convicted because the colonial government at the time did not recognize these early treaties. The government's position basically was, because of historical fact, these things don't exist. So a lot of Mi'kmaq people were charged, in fact, for doing what they did traditionally and what rights were protected under these treaties. So these were ongoing battles now for Mi'kmaq people here in the province who, for 100+ years, argued the legality of these treaties. We have agreements with you people. Why don't you hold your end of the deal? We've done that ourselves now. For example, the War of 1812. Here in Nova Scotia, they were afraid that the Mi'kmaq were going to side with the Americans. Now, Michael Franklin, who was an Indian commissioner at the time, a colonial Indian commissioner, he went out and visited Mi'kmaq communities and to ensure that they would remain neutral during the War of 1812. So Mi'kmaq people did. They said, okay, yes, we have a 1752, 1760, 61 treaty to keep the peace and be of good behavior, so we're going to be neutral and we're not going to take sides. So they held true to that deal. And at the conclusion of the War of 1812, in recognition for that neutrality and keeping their side as 1752, 60, 61 treaty, the colonial government presented them with medallions and tokens of office and parchments, etc., recognizing that autonomy of the Mi'kmaq nation as a sovereign nation, right?